The winds of fortune, rope and iron. The Empire has decided to host a summit at Anvil at the winter solstice, with a view to seeing if those nations who oppose slavery, or who might be convinced to do so, can agree to work together. The Commonwealth, Sumar, the Sarkophon Delves, and Axos have all been invited to send 1 or 2 representatives to attend the summit to negotiate on behalf of their nation. At the request of representatives of the imperial offices, the civil service have prepared a limited briefing on imperial tariffs to help the imperial negotiators assess what changes, if any, they wish to make on their trading arrangements as part of their negotiations. The assumed goal of the summit is to create a formal treaty binding the signatory nations to a set of agreed terms. The official imperial ambassadors cannot put such a treaty with multiple nations to the Senate for ratification, since each ambassador only has authority to act in regard to relations with the nation that they liaise with. Likewise, the imperial consul cannot act for the empire. They only have authority to deal with a nation if the empire has not created a title with ambassadorial powers. Fortunately, the Senate has wisely opted to address that problem in advance. At the autumn equinox, they passed a Senate motion to delegate ambassadorial authority for the summit to a pair of imperial titles, one appointed by the Senate and one by the Synod. Ianth Ravenswatch was duly chosen by the Imperial Senate, and Esker Crowspeaker selected by the Imperial Synod. The action of the Senate ensures that the civil service can proceed with all the normal arrangements for an official meeting of state between representatives of a foreign nation and the Empire. The civil service have scheduled time for the meeting in the Senate building where possible. As official meeting is expected to take some time, they've scheduled further time in military council tent to accommodate the summit when the Senate is in session. There are some complications caused by having 2 delegates. Imperial law requires authority be vested in a single ambassador to ensure that it is absolutely clear who has the legal authority to represent the Empire in this matter. After some consideration, the Constitutional Court have concluded that either delegate may authorise an imperial citizen to speak at the summit, but both delegates will be required to agree the treaty before a senator can present it for ratification by the Senate. If either one of them declines to agree the final text, then the Senate will not legally be able to ratify any treaty. The delegates have instructed the civil service to arrange a short, formal meeting on the Friday evening of the summit, to allow all parties to meet and to exchange terms. This will take place in the Senate, starting at 9 o'clock. The Senate is in session at 10, so the formal meeting will end 15 minutes before that time to allow the room to be cleared and prepared for the Senate session. Formal negotiations will begin in the Senate at 6 p.m. on the Saturday and continue until 8:30 p.m. There will be a short break to allow the delegates to eat before the summit resumes at 10 in the military council tent. It is scheduled to last until 11:30 on the Saturday night, to give members of the Imperial Senate an opportunity to study what has been agreed before the final Senate session on Sunday. The civil service asks all citizens to take note, as the Senate building will now be in use at this time. The 7 p.m. Bourse public auction, which is normally held in the Senate building, will take place instead in the military council tent. Any citizen can negotiate and agree a deal with individuals from another nation. However, the civil service wished to remind all citizens that no one has the legal right to speak during a formal session laid out as above, unless authorised to do so by one of the 2 delegates. Any citizen who wishes to speak with the delegates must either obtain permission from Yanthi or Eska, or else speak to them outside of one of the 3 formal meetings. They will have a small window to do so after the meetings finish, assuming that the delegates remain in Anvil. The civil service do not expect them to remain at Anvil for long, however. They are likely to retire to their quarters to confer privately, and potentially to send winged messengers home. Anyone with the right of witness is able to be present to observe proceedings. It is fine for citizens to be present and observe what takes place. The restriction is only on speaking. As part of preparation for the summit, the civil service have sought to identify issues that they believe may be material to the discussions, particularly if new trading relationships are agreed by treaty signatories. What may prove important is the existing trade relationships with 6 foreign nations that are currently identified as practicing slavery. They are the Axos, the Faradon, the Iron Confederacy, the Thor, Yarm, and Asavea. All 6 of these nations practice slavery to a greater or lesser extent, but only the Aksu are currently invited to the summit. Any treaty which affects the trading relations between one of the listed nations and the Empire could also have an impact on the various commissions which have been constructed in recent years on the basis of trade between the Empire and the nation in question. It is impossible to know in advance what those effects might be. That could only be identified with a precisely worded appraisal. But anything which changes the relationship with the nations could have a deleterious effect on the returns provided by any of the listed resources. The Steel Fist and the various docks and trading posts associated with trade with the Sarkophan Delves should be unaffected, provided relationships are not harmed by the outcome of the summit. Any outcome which negatively impact relations with the Yarmish would also affect the returns of the proposed Yarmish star jewellery, as well as supplies of white seed, which are used to make Imperial Malachite more productive. The Fellowship of the Purple Sails is a loose sodality formed in autumn 379 by 3 ships' captains, the freeborn Olivia Ifrad Irakeza, Therese de Sarvas of the League, and highborn Michael of Crown's Key. The sodality is interested in ensuring Imperial captains continue to access foreign ports. They currently fund the Senate initiative to place civil servants on ships to prevent piracy against foreign vessels, and members of their group negotiated the acquisition of the recipe for artisan's oil with the Commonwealth. They've been reasonably quiet over the last few years as individual members focused on their own trading businesses. The announcement of the trade summit has been seen as something of a schism in their ranks. One faction, led by Therese de Sarvas, is extremely concerned about the idea of the Senate and the Synod interfering directly in matters of international trade like this. They predict disaster if the summit tries to restrict imperial access to ports such as Nemoria or Vezak. The larger faction, led by Michael and Olivia Ifrad Irakeza, agrees that the Empire should use economic means to bring pressure to bear on nations that profit from the enslavement of other people. Yet, even there, division exists. Michael of Crown's Key has expressed support for the idea that the nations who will not stop using slave labour should be embargoed, that there is no place for half measures where virtue is concerned. Olivia, however, disagrees, arguing that the only outcome would be for imperial captains to be barred from visiting ports in embargoed nations, not only impacting their prosperity, but also denying the Empire any future chance to influence those nations. All factions have urged their adherents to respect the decisions of the Senate, however. Senators are, after all, appointed to represent the people of their nation, and will have the ultimate say on how the summit's recommendations are enacted. They have been clear that whatever the outcome, they will continue to donate the money to support the Shipboard Civil Service initiative. At the same time, however, each faction also agrees that it is the responsibility of ships' captains, whose livelihoods will be directly impacted by the resolution of the Trade Summit, to ensure that their voices are heard, not only by the delegates to the summit, but also by the priests and senators with the power to influence the outcome. After all, it is the fleet captains, especially those who trade in Nasavea, Yarm and the Iron Confederacy, who are likely to be most immediately disadvantaged by any changes aimed at trade with slaving nations.